Hello, and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you for being with us today. The Vietnam War was America's second longest war, cost over nearly 60,000 American lives, with thousands more seriously wounded, both physically and mentally. Uh, Obviously, this impacted not just them, but their families. To make matters worse was the treatment that many of them received on return, and we still have 1,573 unaccounted for. As that generation that fought this war gets older, it's important to get firsthand accounts from the survivors. On our show today, we have a Vietnam veteran who served in the Marine Corps during the war. We've had him on here before, so he may look familiar to you, but in the past, he's been on with us to talk about Nathan Bedford Forrest and his exploits during the Civil War, during the war between the states. So today, we are proud to have Gene Andrews with us to tell us about his experience in the Marine Corps during Vietnam. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Light, the energy of life itself. Since the beginning of time, light has sustained us, fueled our growth, and shaped the world. Even Einstein recognized that everything we are is made of light. But what if we could harness the light within us, not just to live, but to renew, restore, and rejuvenate? Introducing LifeWave X39, the first product in the world that activates stem cells using our body's own light. Backed by clinical research, multiple patents, and over 10 years of stem cell research, a revolutionary wearable light technology that unlocks the power of activating our own stem cells with a single, safe, affordable, non-transdermal patch that puts you back in control of how you look, feel, and perform. Unlike drugs or chemicals, X39 works naturally, awakening your body's ability to heal and thrive. It's time to unlock your full potential, restore your vitality, and embrace a healthier, more vibrant you.
Now to our guest, Gene Andrews. Thank you, Gene, for being with us. How are you today?
Doing very well, Dave. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on the program. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We've done several of these. We've had several veterans on and hope to have more on in the future. So if you know some that might want to come on, just please let them know, put us in contact, and we'd love to do that. And I also need to put you in contact with a local friend who tries to collect as many of the stories of veterans as he can, Vietnam War or otherwise. Of course,
Yes,
there's, you know, even your younger Vietnam veterans, most of them are in their 70s at this point. So,
oh, yeah.
so anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Now, you're originally from Tennessee, and I think you grew up somewhere around the Nashville area.
Right. I'm really an odd duck, native Nashvilleian. So there are not many of us left anymore.
Right. So, when did you go in service? Marine Corps?
I joined the Marine Corps in 1968. They had a program called Platoon Leaders Class where you go through officer boot camp for 2 summers. And then when you graduate from college, you get a commission as a second lieutenant. But then every second lieutenant, whether you did that program, came up through the enlisted ranks, or took the Marine option out of the Naval Academy at Annapolis, then we went through 6 months of officer basic school at the Marine Base at Quantico, Virginia, where they trained you to be a rifle platoon commander in a grunt company, a rifle company. And then I also went to a Marine Corps Combat Engineer School at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina before I went to Vietnam. So that was my assignment in Vietnam, was with the engineers.
Oh, okay. So you were dual-hatted, but primarily with the engineers.
Well, what they did, they were telling you that when you came in country, you were going to spend your first 3 months out with a rifle company, because every Marine officer was trained how to do that. And the claim was that if you'd been out with the infantry and you were then in artillery or motor T or engineers or whatever, you knew how better to support the infantry. The truth behind that story, that fairy tale, was that a second lieutenant out in the field in Vietnam had about a 50-50 chance of being killed or wounded your first 3 months in country. So they needed bodies to plug in the holes in the ranks.
But that's the way they dressed it up, huh?
Yes, sir. The government would never lie to you, Dave. You know better than that.
No, of course not, especially the military. Absolutely not. So why did you join? I was just curious. At the time, I mean, by the time you went in, things were already pretty bad.
Yes, sir. Well, I hate to say this, but it was Army ROTC in college. You were required to take 2 years of either Army or Air Force ROTC. And I looked at some of the things they were doing, and I went, holy cow, these guys are going to get somebody killed. And I figured I better get in with somebody that knows what they're doing. And the training in the Marine Corps was really something. I mean, it was hard. And of course, going through boot camp was not a lot of fun. And then going back for that second summer of boot camp, you kind of question somebody's mentality. And I was a lot younger back then, as that picture shows. That photograph right there is from a galaxy far, far away in a time long, long ago. And but that was, of course, the Marine Corps dress blues that they gave us. So
you had to go through regular basic training. It wasn't just an officer course. You had to go through regular basic in addition, correct?
Well, it was an officer's boot camp at Quantico. And the thing was, there were some people said that was harder than enlisted men's boot camp, because you couldn't get out of enlisted men's boot camp unless it was some kind of mental Section 8, a mental problem or crazy, or tried to shoot the drill instructor or something like that. But in the officers boot camp, all you had to do said, I quit. That's it. I don't want to do this anymore. And you were out. And so you always had that hanging over your head, and the drill instructors were always yelling in your ear, why don't you DOR? Why don't you DOR? Drop on a request. So, and they were trying to get rid of it because they didn't want some goofball officer that they may have to serve under someday.
Right.
So they were doing everything they could to weed you out.
Training you like you would be in charge of them. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Did you ever think about DOR?
There were sometimes when they were running us through the swamp or something like that. I thought, what in the world am I doing here? But no, it really, for me, it wasn't that bad, because I'd run track in college. And a lot of the guys really had problems doing the morning PT and the runs and everything. But I could do the running. That was no big deal. I wasn't worn out, but even before breakfast. So I was in really good shape. And at the end, they had a 3-mile run where you had to make it in boots and equipment, carry a rifle and everything. And I finished first in our company. And the drill instructor gave me his highest compliment. He said, well, that wasn't too, well, we won't go into all of the adjectives, but that wasn't too bad. And I thought, well, gosh, he's an old sweetie after all. So that was about as close as we got to be drinking buddies or anything like that.
Okay, so so you were an officer, and 68 you came in, or 69?
68, yes, sir. I was in the Marine Corps on active duty from 68 through 71, those 3 years.
Okay, all right. So when you got ready to go to Vietnam, obviously you'd heard quite a bit about it by that time. So what were your expectations, and once you got there, was it how did that compare? What you expected, and what you really experienced?
I'll have to give the Marine Corps a lot of credit, because the people that were training us at basic school at Quantico had been in Vietnam, the officers and the staff enlisted personnel, and they could give you a lot of tips on things to do and not to do. And this is what's going to happen when you get over there, and that sort of thing. And then when I was assigned to a engineer battalion and the company in that engineer battalion, my platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Herbert Molnax from Anniston, Alabama, he was on his second tour in Vietnam. So we were the two old guys in the company or in the platoon. I was 23 and Sergeant Molnax was 25. All the rest of the Marines in there were teenagers. We usually have 3 or 4 that were 19. Most of them were 18. And we'd have 5 or 6 that were 17-year-olds, dropped out of high school or got kicked out or joined the Marines 2 steps ahead of the law. So whatever. So, but Sergeant Molnax, since he'd already been there, when he spoke, I listened very closely. And I can always tell when I was about to mess up something, because he'd get really polite. He'd say, well, sir, Mr. Andrews, sir, we could do it that way, sir. But, sir, I think the lieutenant might want to look at it this way, sir. And I said, well, just quit wasting time. Just tell me what we need to do. Oh, okay, sir. Just sign these papers and I'll take them up to battalion. No problem. So I listened to him very closely.
Okay, well, that's good. So and I know this varies depending on where you're at in country. I think maybe the heat was probably bad all over, but talk about the heat and terrain.
Well, the heat, you got used to it, the heat and the humidity. And one thing I learned when you're sleeping on the cot, don't ever lay your arm across yourself or across wherever you touched yourself. You're going to swivel laid with your arms out to the side and your feet spread out. And it wasn't too bad at night. You got used to that. But where we were at Dong Ha, it was relatively flat through that part of the country. We weren't over in the mountains. A lot of the things you showed in the black and white clips there were in the mountain terrain over towards the Laotian border in the west. And the closer you got to the coast, the flatter the ground got. In fact, when you got right down to the coast, it looked like it was in Florida, the sand dunes and all of that sort of thing. So it just depended on where you were there. And it was hot everywhere, I guarantee you that. But the terrain varied as to what part of the country you were in.
Okay. I think I saw. Let's pull up some of those slides because I know there's some comments on some. I think you show some rice fields in there, or rice paddies.
Yes, sir.
Now this
and
is
I left
before
out
you
of
headed
San Francisco. Travis, no, that's not Vietnam. That's down on the harbor in San Francisco. I flew out of Travis Air Force Base. And I had a day in San Francisco, so played Sam Tourist and toured around and took a lot of pictures there. And of course, the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yeah.
Okay, so there we are. Now that's the rice paddies close to that area. Our base camp was at Dong Ha in Quang Tri Province, Vietnam. Now that was up north, right below the demilitarized zone. But you can see how flat the ground was around there. And that was sort of in between seasons right there. They drain those out. And, you know, rice grows in standing water. So you can tell from where that's dry, they harvested the rice and drained the rice paddies out and get ready to plow them and put another crop in.
New rice crop.
Yes, sir. That's turning using there wasn't a lot of equipment there. They used the water buffalo for everything. And that, like I said in that comment, that's sort of the John Deere tractor of Vietnam. They used the water buffalo for pulling the plow or carts going to the market in the morning or whatever. But you can tell from that photograph how flat the ground was around there.
So that's not the jungle area then, for the most part.
No, sir. No. And
not a lot of good camouflage unless you have to pretty much lay low to use that for camouflage.
A lot of the firefights and things, you ducked in behind a rice paddy dike, and that was your protection. And then looking off over at the back of that picture there, the tree line, you might have people that shooting at you from that tree line way off in the distance there, and you didn't want to poke your head up too high to look about where the rifle fire is coming from or where you're going to make a good shot.
Hmm. So 3rd Marine, base. That's the unit you were with. Okay.
So that's where we lived, those buildings. And they were plywood buildings. They had screen wire all around them, let air come in. And then they'd have a wall of sandbags about 3 or 4 feet high and 2 or 3 sandbags deep across. The idea being that if you heard incoming, you just roll off your bunk or fall flat on the floor. And unless the artillery or mortar round or rocket came right through the roof of the building, you were pretty safe. If it hit outside, those sandbags would absorb the blast.
Right. Okay.
Or at least that's what they told us anyway. And this is out on the perimeter around the base at Dong Ha. There's a lookout tower, and they would have those bunkers built up around there. And then they would have all sorts of barbed wire around the perimeter there to keep anybody from just walking in there. So that was a lot of our job as the engineers, was to build those things. Yeah, that's one of the bunkers. And you see all the sandbags on top of that to protect it from incoming rocket. And then that's looking west. You can see the hills and the mountains off in the distance there. And the further west you get, you went, the more you got into the mountainous terrain.
Okay. So now you're an engineer. What was your main, you guys primarily were constructing those type of things, or did you guys do some other missions?
A little bit of everything. You'll see some slides where we're building these ammunition and personnel bunkers at these artillery bases. And we would build these things to keep artillery shells in or for the personnel there. they'd use a bulldozer to cut a big trench in the ground, and then we'd build this wooden structure, and then cover it with tar paper to keep it from getting wet. And then they'd push the dirt, take the bulldozer and push the dirt up against it. We did that a lot of times. 1 month, we probably have some slides on that. We were out on route sweeps where we'd check the road every morning for mines or booby traps in the road, which really wasn't that bad. After a while, you walk that same road every morning for 3 or 4 days. You can just tell by looking at it if anything's happened to it. But then you would have to get down in the creeks or the ditches or something and check the culverts or bridges for any kind of wires running underneath there for booby traps. And then they sent us out west to Vandergrift Combat Base over on the Laotian border. And our job out there, we were pouring concrete tent decks for the 9th Marine Infantry Regiment. So when they came back in out of the field and the monsoon hit, they wouldn't be sleeping in a swamp. So we had a lot of different jobs. We put up a basketball goal one time that I don't know if that really rates any high awards or anything in the military, but we had all sorts of different types of jobs. Yeah, then so that's like one of the bases where we worked. It was pretty primitive. I was kind of sarcastic on that. I said they rated that as a 5-star hotel, but it really wasn't. The red barrel on top of that stack of ammo boxes is a shower. You put water in that, and then you could stand up and take a shower. And by the time you got out, it was so hot and humid, you didn't even know you'd taken a shower. But at least you got the dust off of it.
Yeah. Okay. So was your unit involved in any major battles over there?
No, not really. That really wasn't our job. Like you can see some of these boys working there, ours was to do a lot of the building for the different artillery bases. And if the area had been fairly well secured, we would come in and build whatever they needed for them. That's the job they were working on right there. So you can see we weren't wearing flak jackets or helmets or anything like that. Now, when you left the base, you had to have a helmet, flak jacket, rifle, and 200 rounds of ammunition in case you did run into trouble. But then once you started working, we just stacked all that up in the truck that we came out in and then go to work on whatever our project was for that particular location. And that was 2nd Platoon Charlie Company right there.
Okay.
And like I said, they were all teenagers. We would have a few that were 19. Most of them were 18, and we'd have probably half a dozen that were 17. Let me see. I don't know if he's in there. The boy. Okay. On the back row, the black kid that has a cover on, his name is Ernest Redding, and he was from Georgia, and his cousin was Otis Redding. That, had Dock of the Bay and everything. And Ernest, that boy, I tell you what, I probably heard him say about 2 or 3 words the whole time I was in Vietnam. He was the most shy, quiet person I think I've ever been around. And but a good worker, they all were.
So do you stay in touch with any of these people?
I did with one of some of the officers that we came back to the States at about the same time. The Marine there on the right with the bush cover on was my platoon sergeant, Sergeant Monax. And then another sergeant that we had in our platoon, Sergeant Draper, there on the left in the slide. And they were really the ones I had to count on to do a lot of the things because we would split up, they'd send 5 or 6 of us to one job and 5 or 6 to another job. So I couldn't be at 2 or 3 different jobs at the same time. But there was one of the trucks back there behind them that carried us out to whatever our job location was. And that would be assigned by the battalion commander or the company commander. And it was interesting, Dave, when I came in country, they sent me to the 11th Engineer Battalion up at Dong Ha, and went to the office there. And the first sergeant, I gave him my orders, and he said, well, Colonel Evans is here. I'm sure he'd like to meet you. And so he went back to the colonel's office, and then they had me come in, and I introduced myself, and he started asking me some questions. Said, well, we're going to send you to Charlie Company. They're short of officers. And he said, oh, by the way, Lieutenant, where are you from back in the States? And I said, well, sir, I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. And he goes, Nashville? He jumped out from behind the desk, said, well, I'm from Hohenwald. And here I had this lieutenant colonel grabbing my hand and shaking my hand like his long lost nephew had just shown up. And I'd see him around the base, and he'd say, well, now, Lieutenant Andrews, if you need anything, you come to me right now. You let me know if you need anything. So we got to take care of us Tennessee boys have got to stick together. And I said, well, no, sir, things are going fine. He said, well, do you think the Vols are going to get in the bowl game this year? And I said, well, I hope so, sir. And he said, well, I hope so too. And he said, now remember, if you need anything, you come see me. So that was a lucky break, having somebody else from Tennessee as my commanding officer there.
Absolutely.
There's one of our jobs. Like I said, we'd have a bulldozer and cut that big trench there. And that wooden building you see with the tar paper on it, they were going to be putting artillery shells in there. And you can look in the back of that truck, that 6x there, and you see all those artillery shells stacked in the back of that truck. So we would do all the woodwork, the building of that, and then cover it in tar paper, and then they take a bulldozer and push the dirt back up against it, and then we put sandbags on top, and the idea being that it would protect it in case we ever took any incoming artillery or rocket fire, to keep it from blowing up, or for the artillery personnel too, keep them from. Yeah, that's where we were working at a 105 howitzer, right around there. I took several pictures of those. So,
did you guys come under? I understand what your mission was as far as that goes, but I mean, all those places, even the artillery bases, are subject to nothing else to counter battery fire. So, did you guys get attacked a lot anywhere where you're at?
Did when we got out to Vandergrift, and we got incoming rocket fire out of the demilitarized zone. And once you're in country, you learn to tell the difference between outgoing, which is this picture, one of our people firing, or incoming, one of the bad guys firing artillery at you, or rockets, which sound kind of like a sick jet. And you'd be amazed how fast you can roll out of your bed or out of your rack and hit the floor or find a ditch to fall into when you hear something like that coming towards you. So it's just part of survival. That's what you have to learn.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this, and this is a little off, I guess a little off topic, but we've kind of talked about it in the past. And people act like it's some people act like it's a terrible thing, but did you ever see any rebel flags when you're over there? Any Confederate flags?
There were Confederate flags at every base that I went to. And I had one hanging over my bed, and everywhere you went, there were Confederate flags. There were state flags and U.S. flags. Because they were glad to have Southerners there. There wasn't any big deal about it. The blacks didn't say anything about it. The officers in the Marine Corps, of course, they got back here and got politically correct and banned the Confederate flag in the Marine Corps. But there was no problem there at all, except if you were up on the demilitarized zone, they didn't allow Confederate flags, U.S. flags, state flags, any flags, because they didn't want something sticking up on the horizon that made an aiming point for the North Vietnamese that were in the demilitarized zone. And the only people that really believed it was demilitarized were Hanoi Jane Fonda and Teddy Kennedy, but everybody else knew it wasn't demilitarized. And they even bent the radio antennas over, so there wasn't anything sticking up on the horizon that made an aiming point.
Right.
So it wasn't they were against the Confederate flag, it was everything was taken down there.
Right. Okay. Yeah, you don't want to give them a TRP. So you left Vietnam what year? 69?
Yes, sir. I was very lucky. I came in April and came out of Vietnam in August, and they took us out and sent us back to Okinawa to finish out our last. You had a 13-month tour in Fleet Marine Force Western Pacific, which meant Vietnam back then. And so I finished out my last 8 months on Okinawa, and the reason was that was when they started drawing down the American troops in Vietnam. And they picked the 3rd Marine Division because they were the first ones that went in March of 1965. Now, of course, all of those people had already rotated back to the States, but they had to pick some kind of unit to start bringing them out. So 1969 was when they started, because of the Paris Peace Accords, that's when they started pulling the American units out. And in the 3rd Marine Division, they took the support units out first: engineers, motor transport, communications. The last ones to come out were the infantry, the artillery, and the air wing. And there was a lot of difference in this drawdown and the one in Afghanistan. I had people that were in the infantry that told me that when they were leaving, the air was just full of Huey gunships and Phantom jets. And I mean, if a dog came in these Phantom jets and bomb everything, if there was anything that even sounded like a kid's pop gun that went off, the air wing came in there and just took it all out. So they were covered coming out of Vietnam, unlike Afghanistan.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we didn't have we didn't have near as sorry of the president at the time in Vietnam as what we had in 21 in Afghanistan. So I'm sure that had something to do with it. So when you got back, did you have any negative experiences in the civilian world?
No, sir. Had a funny one though. When we finished my tour, my 13-month tour, flew us out of Okinawa, went up to Yokosuka, Japan, up to Anchorage, and then down to the States. And I don't know why they did that, but they said that's a shorter route when you look at a globe rather than just drawing a straight line on a map. Anyway, so we were coming into San Bernardino, California, and we'd heard all these stories about the protesters and spitting on the veterans and doing all that sort of thing. Well, this was a plane that had about 200 Marines on it. So we were really pumped coming back in. We were hoping they were all going to be there at the airport, and we were hoping Jane Fonda was going to be right out in front of them. So by the time they landed and came up to the terminal and they put that chute up to the jet, we were getting ready like you pumped up like you're getting ready for the opening kickoff in the Super Bowl. And so we literally pretty much came running down that chute into this airport, waiting for to just start busting heads of the protesters. Of course, it was 11 o'clock at night. There was nobody in the terminal. The only person there was one elderly black gentleman that was pulling a baggage cart. And he said, well, "So glad you boys made it back okay." And we said, "Well, thank you, sir. We are too." And that was it. So no fights, no protesters or anything.
You
so
sound
we were very disappointed.
Yeah, I was about to say, all fired up and nowhere to go.
That was it.
So what are your thoughts overall on Vietnam? I mean, I know we were in Vietnam for a long time, and I know the whole theory of, we'd already lost China to the communists, and Vietnam would be the next domino, and
that was pretty much what we were looking at, that domino theory, that if Vietnam produced enough rice for all of Southeast Asia, and they said that if that failed, then the next country would be Laos and Cambodia, and then maybe moving all the way over to Thailand. So the whole idea was to hold on to Vietnam just like we held on to South Korea to stop the spread of communism. And of course, that didn't work out when they pulled the Americans out. I think that's why the North Vietnamese, well, by the time I got there, let me back up a little bit. The Viet Cong had been wiped out by the Marines. So all of the fighting that we did was against the North Vietnamese regulars and the Chinese communists. They had to bring them in to continue the war. The Viet Cong had gotten wiped out the year before in Quang Tri when they tried to take the Marine base at Khe Sanh. They brought in so much air support with the Phantom jets. With napalm, they literally burned the jungle back about 200 meters outside the perimeter of the wire. And then they could pinpoint those hills around Khe Sanh, and they brought in the B-52 bombers from Okinawa and Thailand, and they literally pounded those hills down into flat ground with these big clusters of 500-pound bombs. And then the other thing that pretty much finished off the Viet Cong, initial success during Tet in '68 when they took over Hue City. But then the 1st and 5th Marine regiments came in there and cleaned them out of Hue City. That was some brutal fighting. I mean, it was street to street, house to house, and finally got down room to room. But they got the Viet Cong out of there, and then that's why they found all those mass graves where they'd killed all the politicians and nurses and doctors and anybody that had worked with Americans. And despite their initial success, that pretty much wiped out the Viet Cong in '68. So by '69, they were having to use the North Vietnamese regular army to do their fighting for us. And the Chinese communists, there were a lot of them there too. So the whole thing was that if we could save South Vietnam and hold on to that, then it would be like Korea. You'd have North Korea and South Korea, and then North Vietnam South. But the difference was Korea Peninsula, and they could guard all the approaches coming into South Korea. They would have to either come straight across the demilitarized zone or use some kind of boats or ships around the coast. And the Navy made sure nobody got into South Korea from the ocean. And they had it was well fortified, a much shorter distance across the peninsula of Korea from between North and South Korea, which is pretty easy to maintain the defensive position there. And the maintaining the defense along the demilitarized zone wasn't all that bad. But then you had such a long border with Laos and Cambodia that it was easy for the North Vietnamese to come down through all those trails in the jungles and then just veer off into South Vietnam, pretty much wherever they wanted to, just like interstate highway and an exit ramp, wherever they wanted to turn off and come into South Vietnam.
And
so that was the main problem there.
And we would bomb in North Vietnam, but we wouldn't put, I'm sure we had some troops in there, but we wouldn't put conventional units in there in any size into North Vietnam.
No, and they had Marine recon units that went into the demilitarized zone. Of course, they went across the border into Laos. Yeah. And the recon units, their job wasn't to fight. It was to go in and get information and pinpoint these targets along these trails so that the B-52 bombers or the Marine Air Wing can come in and take out the supply lines across these trails. But if a recon unit got in a firefight, that meant they weren't doing their visible to come in there and just radio out these positions. Yes, sir.
Yep, absolutely. You got some more pictures we can go through here. I know you took quite a few of them while you were over there.
Well, I had a friend back in the States that said take slides because you can get prints made from slides, but you can't make slides from prints. So I would do that, and my folks got a slide projector, and I would send these slides back to them and write a sheet of paper. This is where we were. This is who this person was, and things like that. And these are just pictures from where these different artillery bases were where we worked. And they even had some of the Army artillery units there as well. So we did a lot of work for the Army units that were there at these artillery bases as well as just the Marines. Now this is a place called Con Thien, and it was up on the close to the demilitarized zone. You can see the mountains in the background there, and the tanks, 3rd Marine Tank Battalion that was there. So they didn't use tanks a whole lot in Vietnam. They were more just, mobile artillery pieces, really. Right. And so that was one of the places where we worked. But you can see, Dave, you can see how the terrain starts to change as you're going further west and getting toward the mountain region over there.
And those look like some pretty steep climbs there.
Yes, sir. They were. Another shot of the base there at Con Thien. And once again, the lookout towers and the bunkers with the sandbags and the barbed wire. And we worked quite a few weeks there on building different things for them. So but then once again, you look at the back of the slide there, and that's the mountain area. And then this was, most of them were surrounded with minefields, and you'd have a sign on the friendly side telling you that it is a minefield. So you didn't go just taking a stroll in the evening out around through the grass out there. That'd be a rather painful stroll if you stepped on anything. But that was another job of the Marines to have to put those in, and you always made a chart of it where they were in case you had to go back and take that out again. So that's another one of the jobs we were working on, is building those bunkers for the artillery, shells, and for personnel there. And that was at Con Thien as well. So you can tell we were pretty informal. Now, this is the month where we're out on the route sweeps. And you have the metal detector, and you would have a knife or a bayonet. And when you pick up some kind of click, you would probe in at a 45-degree angle to see what was under the ground there. And that looks like a bale of hay back there in the background by that hooch or that building. Those are rice stalks. And they use that a lot like we use straw here in this country for bedding or for whatever you needed it for. But once again, this is a flat part of the country. You can see the water and the rice paddy off to the left there. And then that was working the road. They would send us out about 4 o'clock in the morning, and we would check about 11 miles of road coming into Dong Ha. And they would have the road blocked until we had checked the road to make sure it was safe for the people to come in to the town, to the market. Because what you have to remember back then, I think we have some slides on that. Yeah, that's it. You got some kind of clicks on the metal detector, so they're checking the ground there to see what's under there. And the bad thing is the metal detector picks up everything. So if somebody threw away a beer can that got covered up, then you got to dig that out. But then the other part of that, we'd have to check any streams or anything that went under the road for any kind of wires or anything running under there. So,
and that was something constant. I'm sure, just like they did in Iraq and Afghanistan, you had to constantly do the route clearance. So you clear it one day, but hey, the next day it's a whole new ballgame.
The thing was, once you'd walk that road for 4 or 5 mornings, you can tell just by looking at it if anybody's messing with it. But you always had to get down in the water and check a culvert or a bridge for any kind of wires running in there. Now, if you didn't check it, this is what could happen. And I put on that slide, that wasn't a job, that wasn't us checking the road. That was before we got there. And what happened there, though, um, uh, the North Vietnamese weren't stupid. They put an explosive device in a sandbag and left it sitting out on the road in full sight, because you can see the stack of sandbags in the background there. They were always falling off of trucks and junk like that. And during the day, people would come by and they'd straddle it or drive around it. And late in the afternoon, this guy driving this Jeep with 3 of his buddies in there thought it'd be funny to run over that thing and bounce the guys in the back. Well, it bounced them all right. It killed one and wounded the other 3. So that's a bad mistake that somebody made.
And I can't really tell from here, but it looks like on the side of the roads there. I mean, yeah, there's some vegetation, but I know one of the things in Iraq was the roads. There was trash everywhere, and they would hide it in anything. They would hide an IED. They'd hide it in a dead animal, obviously a vehicle, any trash. They had these curbs. They would take out a section of the curb because they were in sections. They weren't like ours where they were more solid. They'd take a curb out, put the IED behind it, and put the curb back. So I mean, you had to check you had to look all the time. I'll tell you what, when you come back from a place like that, driving down the road's a whole. You look at trash on the side of the road in a whole different way now.
I tell you what I did. I got used to when I was walking through woods or something. I wouldn't step right over a log. I'd go to the side of it, because a lot of times they'd figure out about your stride length, and they'd put an explosive device in the ground just as you stepped over a log. And I would be out in the woods behind our house or something. I'd walk around the log and go, "Wait, dummy, you're back in the States. You don't have to do that anymore." But it's funny how you learn that. Now, these are we cleared the road. These were some of the villagers coming in. Mostly women carried all of this, and they had these bamboo poles across their shoulder. They could carry about 100 pounds in each one of those baskets or bags or something like that, because they would kind of walk and bounce that bamboo pole at the same time, so they could carry a pretty heavy load when they were coming in.
Wow.
And that's one of the villages in the background. We found out, the ones that were on the ground were the BRU, and the ones on the stilts were the Montagnards, and they didn't get along real well together, so they had to build their villages separate. And a lot of our job was to keep them from fighting against each other. So anyway, I guess
I've always heard the Montagnards were friendly with us. What about the Brew? I haven't heard anything about them.
Well, they were too, as long as we could keep the market open and where they could go in and sell their fish or chickens or whatever. And the Montagnards were a lot better fighters, really. And this was one of the resettlement villages. They brought them down out of the mountains because it was hard to protect them up there, and they got them in an area where they could build a defensive position around them and do a lot better job of taking care of them. And so they appreciated that, and they served in a lot of the ARVN units, the Army Republic of Vietnam, and they were good fighters. They were really tough. Of course, there were always kids up and down the road begging for candy or chewing gum or cigarettes or anything that you throw off a truck when you're driving by there. It's kind of pitiful. They stayed by the road, and by the, halfway through the day, they were just tan from the dust they were covered in. But, they wanted something to eat or something that they could sell. So the war was tough on them, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was laughing about that. The men rode the bus going into town. The women had to walk. And so my comment was, "Is this a great country or what?" So anyway, they packed on those buses to go in there, and they were all the uniforms. They were the PFs, Popular Force, sort of like local National Guard or something like that. That wasn't the regular Army, the ARVNs. But
I saw something like that. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I saw something like that in Iraq. The men don't do much over there that I can tell. And we used to have to set up, after we got in country, we were setting up because they have, we'd have to drop the gas off, benzene, or I think is what they call it. And they had it in these big jugs, kind of like these big metal jugs, kind of like propane over here. Only they're a lot bigger. Okay, I mean they're probably this tall. Okay, different sizes, of course. But we went to a distribution point, and it's like there's these guys hanging around, but they're not the ones that are carrying them up. Because it was like a 1-for-1 exchange, and we were just providing security. Okay. But they would come, the women were doing everything. And I mean, these things were fairly heavy. And I'm like, man, what a sorry bunch of guys. Is they have some little old woman or some young girl carrying that. And I'm like, what is wrong with these guys? And yeah, I saw that.
Well, that's what we used to laugh at, like that slide of that photograph we were looking at, those women walking alongside the road. And they'd get those bamboos across the shoulder, and they could kind of bounce in as they were walking and carry a tremendous amount of weight in those things. So, anyways, different culture, different custom. So we just kind of stayed out of the way. Now, this is in the village, in the market there. And the comment was there that there's no refrigeration. So whatever you bought for the day, if you bought just enough that you were going to eat for that day, because it wouldn't last. It would spoil if you tried to keep it more than a day. So you would go into the market, not me, you, but the villagers would go into the market. And that was down further south in Quang Tri City. They took us down there for a tour in Quang Tri City, and they would buy just whatever they needed for the meal for that day. And then you either ate it up, or if you had anything left over, you fed it to the hogs. There's no way you could keep it in that humidity overnight as leftovers for the next day. That just wasn't going to work. So that was the marketplace. Yeah.
Did you guys get targeted a lot in the marketplace?
No, it was pretty secure. The Marines had pretty much cleared out the Viet Cong. And when I was there, most of the fighting was over on the Laotian border. And there you have fish they're selling there. And like I said, everything was sold just to be eaten that day. There weren't any leftovers. You couldn't, the heat and the humidity would take care of that. You couldn't do that. And they didn't have refrigerators in every one of the local houses. And then that's, once again, the rice paddies around there. And they didn't eat beef. The water buffalo and the cattle were too valuable as work animals. So they'd eat chicken or they'd eat fish, but no beef. That was something you didn't want to do. And they, some of them, if you had a truck out there, or a Jeep or something, and you ran into one of their water buffalo on the road and killed it or something, it was a big payment that the Marine Corps had to make to these farmers. And a lot of times the farmers would drive their animal out into the road to get hit, because they can make a lot more off of it being a dead animal than they could as a work. They could buy 2 or 3 work animals if one of them got killed and the U.S. government had to pay for it. So,
yeah, especially if you got one that's old already. He's getting old.
He's not going to last anything. Now, this is a fortune teller. And the young man there in the uniform and the young lady are getting ready to get married. And he's reading the chicken bones to tell them what would be a good day to get married, or if they ought to get married at all, or anything like that. So I guess he was like a marriage counselor for the young people getting married there. It's interesting. You see a lot of different things. This is a Buddhist temple. And if you notice on top of the doors there are swastikas.
Right.
And the swastika was a sign of Buddhism about 1,000 years before the Nazis used that in Germany.
Wow.
So I saw that and I thought, were the Germans over here? And they said, oh no, that was a symbol of Buddhism. And that's why that symbol was on top of those doors at that Buddhist temple.
I remember hearing something about it being related to something besides the Nazis, but I didn't realize it was Buddha.
Exactly. And then this is a Catholic church. When the French had Indochina, and it was a French colony, they built a lot of these, of course, it was their religion, mainly it was Catholicism. So they built a lot of these Catholic churches, and a lot of the language in Vietnam has a lot of French in it. So if you can speak French, you could communicate with the local Vietnamese people fairly well. So that was one of the Catholic churches that the French built back when it was Indochina. Now this was interesting. This was out in a garden outside of that church. And those big, tall lotus stalks in the back are made out of concrete.
Wow.
And that's a symbol of Buddhism. But if you look down at the bottom, they've got a statue of the Virgin Mary. So they were covering all their bases. They didn't know in the afterlife it's going to be Buddhist or Catholic, but they had them both covered there.
Wow.
So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Now, so I know that the French were pretty much booted out of there in '54. I can't remember the name of the big battle that.
At the fort at Dien Bien Phu.
Yes. Okay.
And they got surrounded there. And when the Marine base at Khe Sanh was surrounded in January of '68, and the siege of Khe Sanh went on from January to April, all the newspapers back here in the States were saying, "Oh, the Marines are going to be wiped out. This is going to be another Dien Bien Phu, just like the French, and the Marines will be wiped out," and so forth and so on. And I talked to a couple of Marines that had been there at Khe Sanh, and they said, that was total BS. They said, they would have had to have killed every single Marine at Khe Sanh before they could come in there and take that base. So there wasn't any way they were going to give that up.
Yeah. So were there any French?
Now, this is a place.
I'm sorry, were there any?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Were there any French left at all in Vietnam after that?
There may have been in some of the cities like Da Nang or Hue City or down in Saigon or some of those places like that. There weren't any out where we were. We were pretty much way out in the boondocks. This was another landmark in Quang Tri province called the Rock Pile. And it was an observation post that they could see all the way over into North Vietnam and demilitarized zone. And they had huge telescopes up there on top of it. And it was an artillery base as well up on top of that. So, but the Rock Pile was a pretty well known location there in North Vietnam. This is where we were out at Vandergrift combat base. Now you can tell the terrain has really changed there. And these are the ridges of the mountains around the base down there in the valley. And it was put there to stop one of these infiltration routes into South Vietnam. And it was a little more primitive than our base back at Dong Ha. They were all tents. There weren't any permanent buildings there. And you had tents that you were living in, but you still had the sandbag walls around the tents to protect you from incoming rocket fire or artillery fire, mortars, anything like that. So that's Vandergrift combat base. And this just another shot of the base there. And of course, always the barbed wire around to try to keep people from running in on you at night. And then once again, this was a place where the helicopters would come in to refuel. And that's one of those big CH-46 helicopters that had the twin rotors on it. And they would come in and land, and they would never turn the motors off. They would just be on the ground long enough to get refueled or pick up ammunition or Marines or whatever their load was going to be. But they'd never cut those rotors off because they wouldn't stay on the ground very long. They made too good of a target from anybody that was up there in those hills or the mountains around the base. So they'd get in there, get whatever they needed, and get out of there. So that's a couple more of them coming in to land. And the red there, the fuel tanks. And like I said, they just stay on the ground just long enough to get refueled, and then they lift off and be gone.
Yeah, they don't hang around, that's for sure.
No, too good a target. Now, this is out on the road. This is a grave site,
a
Vietnamese grave site. And you didn't go in there. We were told not to. That was in very poor taste. And if you notice that gate there's a big concrete slab just inside of the gate. And that was to keep evil spirits from getting into the grave of their ancestors. And as we all know, and I'm sure you know this too, and our viewers probably know as well, evil spirits always travel in a straight line. So if you had a big concrete slab there, they'd have to come in and turn, and they couldn't make the turn and come back and get into the grave of their ancestors. So
yeah,
I never questioned that. If that's what they thought, then fine, let's go ahead. And you notice they kind of put barbed wire up around it to keep cattle and things from getting in there. This is another area that we worked as close to a place called Jiolin, and it was right up on the demilitarized zone and right over on the coast. And that gate was from an old French plantation that had been there. So there's still a lot of the signs in French and a lot of the French architecture and things like that that were still left around the country that hadn't been completely destroyed by the war. And that's just another.
I'm sorry.
That's what we were talking about, that area. As you get down toward the coast, it's just flat, sandy land. Looks like parts of Florida. And I made the comment on the picture there. Those holes in that concrete post, not termite holes. Those are bullet holes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fighting around there at one time.
Now you mentioned a minute ago about keeping the spirits out. I mean, they were a fairly superstitious people, weren't they?
Well, like a lot of third world countries are, that's what they believed in Buddhism and so forth. So you had to really be careful about what you did. It was, you go into a village and a lot of kids come running up, and they're begging for candy and chewing gum and stuff. You ignored them and you went and spoke first to the village chief. It was insulting if you started playing with all these little kids and you ignored the old gentleman that was the village chief, or you didn't want to pat a kid on the head. And like we do, little kids come along, you pat them on the head and, hey, how are you doing? That sort of thing. That was a very insulting sort of thing to do. So, and they gave us classes on that. If you go out and you meeting some of the locals, here are the do's and don'ts that you should do.
Right.
And it wasn't like they were going to, attack you if you patted a kid on the head, but you want to get them saying, well, why do we want to try to help these adults? And they do this and they do that. It's kind of like Yankees moving down south, you insult the locals.
One of the things I noticed in Iraq, and I'm sure this is true everywhere in every war that America's been involved in, you bring out kids and soldiers, Marines, they're distracted. They want to give them candy. They want to give them this, or whatever. I mean, and that was one of the things in Iraq I was real leery of, because, and I had to, I had to get on. I was a platoon sergeant. I had to get on my guys sometime because they would gather around the vehicle, and I'm like, no, get them away from here. And I mean, it seemed mean, but I'm like, no, because I don't know what your experiences were over there. I'm sure you've heard of them, but a lot, sometimes those kids themselves might be, maybe they've got a grenade or booby trapped or what, or it's a distraction so that the bad guys can hit you while you're paying attention to the kid.
Exactly. I'll tell you, one of the scariest things we did when we were out on those route sweeps, we had a big truck, 6x that we traveled in. We had a trailer behind it with sandbags, and we would buy back dud ordnance from the kids. If an artillery shell hit and had a bad fuse, it didn't go off, we'd buy it back. We thought it was a lot easier to pay $1,000 to this kid, which in Vietnamese money, which is about $1.95 in US money, to pay him for that rather than having it used to be shot back at us or, like you said, made into a booby trap. You couldn't use it again because obviously there was something wrong with it. So you'd see this little kid coming across the field carrying a 105 round, which is only about this long, shoulder width. But to him, it was like this huge thing that he was carrying to go, hey, Huncho, you buy it? We go, yeah, we'll buy it. No problem. Whatever
just set it right there.
Yeah, just put it down right there. Don't drop it, whatever you do, kid. And we put it in those sandbags, and then we had a big pit out at the end of our route sweep. We put it in there and put C4 in there and det cord and a couple of blasting caps and just blow the stuff up because it was too shaky to ever use again.
Right.
And we, like I said, we figured it was a lot easier to buy it back than to have it shot back at us. Now, this is over on the coast, right along the coast of South Vietnam. And a lot of it looked pretty much like Florida, just the sand dunes. And the only difference was there was a lot of barbed wire around there. I don't think you see too much of that at Daytona Beach.
Is the barbed wire securing the timeshare condo that you wrote there on the bottom? Is that what the barbed wire, is that what's there to keep them out?
That's right. Keep the homeless out of our condo where we pay for it. And of course, one of the bunkers with the sandbags around it and the barbed wire. And then that's the Gulf of Tonkin out there on the horizon. So that was another place where we worked over there. We worked on some of those fire support bases right along the coast. And then it wasn't all, blood and guts and war and everything. We did have some time off. And that's a good picture of one of the buildings back there behind us. It was just plywood buildings with a tin roof on it. They put the sandbags on there to keep the wind from blowing the roof off. And then you'd have a sandbag wall around the edge of that about 3 or 4 feet high. And then that was what we were living in. No air conditioning. So, and there's the officers in Charlie Company, 11th Engineer Battalion. I was on the left. The young officer there behind the steering wheels from Texas, and the fellow over on the right, Jamie Atherton, we were real good friends. He was actually in my wedding. We went through basic school together and then engineer school together. And we did let one northern boy slip in there, our XO, executive officer, right there standing up with the silver bars, and we were all brownie bars, just second lieutenants.
Token Yankee.
We could tell how disappointed we were that day. We found out that they were going to transfer us out of Vietnam. So that's why all the sad were in that picture.
I can see the depressed look there.
It was, yeah. So that was where we were getting ready to load up all of our equipment and get all of the heavy equipment out of there. And then that was our, like I said, our base there at Dong Ha. And you see all the buildings just with the plywood sides and the tin roofs. And they took us, and we'll have a couple of slides later on, show you the ships they put us on. They had to put us on LSTs to get out of there because we had, road graders and bulldozers and dump trucks and all that sort of thing. And a lot of the enlisted or personnel that we had that didn't have to go with the equipment, they flew them in those C-130s down to Da Nang and to load everybody on ships. So, and that was another one of our jobs. You notice that area there, we would put down that beach matting, and those are pieces of metal that would lock together and make an airstrip out of it, because that would keep, during the rainy season, that would spread out the weight of an airplane or something where it didn't sink down in the mud. If it got hit, it's a lot easier to repair one of those sections of metal than to have to dig up concrete and re-pour that. So that was another one of our jobs, to put that, called it beach matting, was those sections of metal that locked together. And loading up with all of our equipment and heading out. So
how long was the flight?
It's been, sir?
How long was the flight?
It didn't take but about 30 minutes to get down to Da Nang. That's the harbor in Da Nang.
I'm talking about back to the States.
Back to the States? Yeah. Let's see. It was about 24 hours, something like that, to come out of Okinawa and all the way back to the States. And they would, like I said, we came out, went up to Yokosuka, Japan, over to Anchorage, Alaska, stopped there for fuel. I got off and walked around in the airport in Anchorage just to say I'd been to Alaska, and came on back down to the States. And this is the harbor in Da Nang. And it's hard to tell there, but a lot of those buildings were built by the French, and it has a lot of the French architecture. And it's really a beautiful country, except where the war tore up a lot of it. So I enjoyed seeing that part of Da Nang. It was very nice. And that was my friend Jamie Atherton. We were on board ship and leaving, and waving goodbye to Vietnam. Said, it's, we've had a lot of fun here, but it's time for us to head out of here.
Time to go.
Okay.
Yeah. Well,
and that was Lieutenant Andrews on the deck of one of the LSTs with the harbor in Da Nang in the background. So you can tell I was really sad about leaving too.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, I wasn't the brightest crayon in the box. When I found out we were leaving, I went to our company commander and I said, Captain Byer, can I sign a form to stay in Vietnam? Because they weren't taking all of the Marines out at once. And I didn't want to be living safe and sound in Okinawa, and there were guys still back there fighting the war. And he said, no, we have to have a certain number of Americans out by a certain date because of the Paris Peace Accords. And he said, if we have you here, then we got to get somebody else. So later on, when I got out of there, I thought, what in the world were you thinking about? So anyway, that was our trip down to Da Nang. And that was one of the LSTs that we were on. We were on the USS Westchester County. And that was the sister ship that we had. And you can see a lot of the heavy equipment on the deck there. And those things are rough out on the ocean because they have a flat hull where they can run up on a beach, and the doors open and they can drive tanks off of there. Or in our case, they could drive off trucks or road graders or bulldozers and things like that. And but boy, when it hits a wave, a regular ship has a keel on it that cuts through the wave. And these flat ships, they just go up and boom, down on the wave and up and boom. And it's a lot of fun trying to sleep on one of those things at night when you're bunks.
Like trying to sleep on a deuce and a half, huh?
Yeah, exactly. And that's just a shot of the deck with all the equipment on there.
Okay. Well, hey, I know
they stopped.
I know we kind of wanted to keep it
go ahead.
To an hour because I know you've got some other things lined up, and I certainly don't want to keep you from that.
No, that's fine. I've enjoyed being on here, and thank you very much for having me on. And that's the LST dock on Okinawa unloading there. And anyway, I really appreciate the time, and I hope our viewers got some information about what went on in Vietnam. It wasn't all blood and guts.
Right.
A lot of us were working on jobs just like worked on back here in the States. Actually, it's pretty easy for me because from the time I was at college, every summer I worked for a construction company. So a lot of what we were doing in Vietnam was the same thing I'd been doing as a teenager back in the States. So it really wasn't starting from scratch. It just in a different location. You had barbed wire around everything. Yeah, a little hotter, barbed wire and sandbags.
A little hotter and a little more dangerous than Nashville at the time anyway, right?
At the time. I don't know about Nashville today, but anyway,
yeah,
it wasn't as bad back then.
Absolutely. Well, hey, I appreciate you coming on. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for your service. Any closing thoughts?
No, sir, that was about it. I hope, like I said, I hope our viewers got some information about what the country looked like and what all was going on over there. And I would really enjoy, and I don't say enjoy in the Marine Corps. Some of my best friends, as I said, made while I was in the Marine Corps. And there were 3 of them that came to Nashville when I was married and were in my wedding. So we've stayed together down through the years. Unfortunately, most of them died off, and some of them from Agent Orange and things like that that he contracted while they were over there. But I was very lucky. I got out of there without a scratch, didn't get a Purple Heart. In fact, just to sum it up, I wasn't any kind of hero. I didn't get any kind of individual ribbons or medals or anything like that. I think the only accomplishment I had that I think has any recognition at all is that Sergeant Molnax and I brought 27 teenage Marines out of country alive. Good. So that was my only accomplishment.
Good. Well, that's a good accomplishment. There's a lot of people that can't say that, and not necessarily their fault, but I'm sure that's one that all of them wish they could say. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Well, hey,
Dave, thank you very much.
Hey, absolutely.
Enjoyed being with you as always.
Always.
Back on. We'll see if we can't get some more Confederate shows for you going here somewhere down the road.
Yeah. Do you have any announcements about the Chapel Hill that you want to pass on?
The Forest Homecoming event that we have every year out at the Nathan Bedford Forest Home, Chapel Hill, is on Saturday, the 20th of June, 2026. We'll have infantry, cavalry, and artillery reenactors out there. We'll have a bunch of vendors set up. We'll have musical entertainment. It's a Southern event, so we'll have a lot of food and drinks. So we invite everybody to come out there and see us on that weekend and see the Forest Home. So I hope they can come by.
Well, I hope I can make it. I haven't been down there yet for that, so I'd like to make it this year. Hey, thanks.
Well, you got my phone number. Just give me a call, and I'll give you a tour someday whenever you'd like to come out there.
Sounds good. I appreciate it, and I appreciate you, and you have a good day. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much, Dave. We appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Take care. And thank everybody for tuning in, watching the show. We appreciate it. Hey, we are trying to hit the 1,000. We want to have 1,000 subscribers by the end of the month. Earlier today, we were at 920, thereabouts. So we really would like to hit that 1,000 mark before the end of the month. So please subscribe, share us with your friends. It doesn't cost anything. We just want you to subscribe. We noticed that a lot of our listeners are not subscribers, but they should be. So it doesn't cost you anything. Just subscribe. So we really appreciate that. So tomorrow night, 7 p.m. regular show, regular time, we're going to have John Llewellyn, who is running for House District seat 78, and he's going to tell us what he believes, why he's running, what he hopes to accomplish. And, we'll have some questions for him, and then, get a little information, maybe some upcoming events that you can attend if that's in your area. And then at 8:30, we are going to have Claiborne Thornton. He started THEA, which is Tennessee Home Education Association. I think that organization is about 40 years old. And if I'm not mistaken, he was the starter, the founder of it, and he is the current president. And we'll just talk some about the organization. And then there's some legislation in the General Assembly that they are following, supporting, and we'll talk about that as well. Now, Wednesday, we're going to have Richard Archie at 9 p.m. and we're going to talk about a bill that came up in committee this past week. House Bill 1971 Senate Bill 1958. Stevens is the Senate sponsor. With, if you're in my district, you're in his Senate district. And this bill basically, I mean, it really seriously infringes on our right to challenge unconstitutional state laws. I mean, it's pretty blatant. And some of you may have heard of it and read about it. But if you haven't, this Wednesday, 9 p.m., we're going to have Richard on. We're going to have some audio from the hearing as well. We're going to really dig into this because you need to know about it. It's one of those bills that needs to be stopped. Both the House sponsors, everybody in the House committees and the Senate committee needs to hear from you on this. And so we're going to get you up to speed on it, the good, bad, and the ugly. And there's really no good in it. It's all bad and ugly on this bill. So tune in for that, 9 o'clock Wednesday with Richard Archie. Also, tomorrow night, I will, on the Informer Report, I'll have some more information on other legislation that you need to know about this upcoming week. So, hey, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you. Don't forget to subscribe and share. That's it from Big Rock, the metropolis in Stewart County. Thank you for joining us.